All right. So, welcome to the Sunday afternoon call. About half the audience here is actually in Thailand, and others are spread around Europe, someplace, I suppose. So, uh, Daniel, you had a question about Dhamma talks, and that my answer immediately was that all things are done in moderation or in the sense of the middle path without doing it too much. That in fact, a well balanced practice would be incorporating all of that kind of stuff. And yet, people tend to go after and pursue one thing. An example of pursuing one thing is like learning Pali and translating and becoming famous as a translator. Another one would be somebody who is writing books. And they get off into writing books. And also, because we've got recordings now, we can actually listen to one recorded Dhamma talk after another, after another, after another. Or some people get 100% into practice and then they don't listen to any Dhamma talks, they don't read anything, they just sit there and get bored. And so what we need to look at is that things need a balance. This is in fact what the word upeka actually means, is to be able to balance things or allow things to go into a middle path without overdoing one thing or another. And so this is actually a very good question about how many Dhamma talks to listen to. It's actually quite possible that people stumble onto our channel and then listen to one Dhamma talk after another, and that's all the Dhamma that they ever do is just listening to Dhamma talks, even if the Dhamma talks themselves are actually instructions about how to practice. They don't ever practice. They're just listening to Dhamma talks. Another disadvantage of Dhamma talks, especially if you're listening to a variety of teachers, is that somebody will say something and then somebody will say something else, and then the student who's listening to those things becomes confused. Well, wait a minute, I heard this over here and I'm hearing that over there. And in certain contexts, both of the teachings would be correct, but the students is hearing the differences rather than the similarities. And so that's the one thing that we can begin to count on if you're listening to a lot of Dhamma talks, is to begin to see the similarities in the various teachings rather than looking for distinctions or differences and things like that. An example would be David brought up the issue of the teaching of dukkha, dukkha nirodha. And the question arises because one teacher will say it means that's the only thing that the Buddha teaches is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. It says both formally and now, I teach only dukkha and dukkha nirodha. And then somebody can come along and pick the Pali apart and not find the Pali word of the word only. And so he'll say, wait a minute, the Buddha didn't say that this was the only teaching. But basically, that's what the whole sutta number 22 is all about, is that the Buddha is teaching dukkha, dukkha nirodha, that no other teaching is really worthwhile as a topic. This is, in fact, the Dhamma, is how to eliminate the dukkha in one's life. And that there actually is a well-known sutta that's, let us say, highly regarded all over the world as the Buddha's first teaching. There's no guarantee that that's true, but there is the commentary about that this sutta was the sutta that he delivered to his 5 companions after he chased them down to the deer park, Isitanya, after he sat under the Bodhi tree for 6 weeks. And in that sutta, it's known as the Dhammacakkappavanta Sutta. He teaches them the Four Noble Truths, but he introduces the Four Noble Truths with the middle path. So you could actually say that the very, very first teaching that the Buddha ever gave was about the middle path. And then he teaches the Four Noble Truths. But if you'll understand it correctly, it's the same teaching. That the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is, in fact, the teaching of the middle path. Because any time that we go to an extreme on anything, there is dukkha. Another example of that would be if we are seeing what's going on and not making too much out of it, but just experiencing what really is, that would mean that we're really close to reality. Whatever is, and when we experience it as it is, that's real. But when we make stuff up, when we add stuff to it, we get farther and farther away from reality, and that's where the dukkha lies. The closer to reality we have, the less dukkha there is, and the further away from reality, then the more likely there is going to be dukkha. So, in this teaching of dukkha, dukkha nirodha, go ahead, Amrit, you got a question.
So one question. So one, remember one teacher was saying, so when Buddha got enlightenment, so first thing which occurred to him is that the Dhamma which he learned is very subtle. It is very, very difficult to teach. And only people with a very little dust in their eye can understand it. But on the other hand, this teaching dukkha, dukkha nirodha looks quite simple to me.
Okay. Actually, that statement that you're talking about can be found in a sutta in the Digha Nikaya. I think that it's sutta number 22. No, it's, excuse me, number 15 for sure. And in the Digha Nikaya, sutta number 15, Ananda came to the Buddha, and in the respect of the Paticca Samuppada, he said just what you said, that he finds it very simple and easy. Well, Ananda had been with the Buddha for quite a long time. In fact, he knew Ananda from childhood. That the mother, surrogate, who was his actual mother's sister, was the actual natural mother of Ananda. And so Ananda was part of the royal family. He was part, like the brother of the Buddha. And in the last 25 years of the Buddha's life, Ananda was his attendant. So he knew Ananda. He really, really knew him. And so when he said that that's not true, Ananda, that the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of especially Paticca Samuppada, are profound. They're deep. They're difficult to understand. Now, the reason that he said that to Ananda was because he knew that Ananda was well spooked in spooks. That Ananda believed all kinds of things and didn't listen to the Buddha very well. And so when Ananda, who has a lot of magical belief, would tell the Buddha that he understands Paticca Samuppada, the Buddha would say it's profound and subtle because the actual teachings of Paticca Samuppada point out that there is no reason for you to get magically inclined. You don't believe in all kinds of stuff. That in fact, the four woeful states is one of the places where there's a lot of magical thinking. The four woeful states is hell. It is the hungry ghost, the preta. It is being reborn as a dumb animal. And then there is the low-class heavenly world of the Asuras. Now, this sounds like a magical teaching of hell, hungry ghost, being reborn as an animal, being reborn in a low-class heaven. But in fact, every one of us go through these states. We are reborn that way. An example of being reborn as a dumb animal, we start doing this as children, and then we do it the rest of our lives. And what is that? A dumb animal does what it's told to do under the fear of retribution, and the dumb animal doesn't get any reward. That's the dumb animal. So the example would be the horse who lives in a pasture. He's got all kinds of delicious things to eat. A new farmer comes along, straps a plow to that horse, and makes and forces the horse to plow up his entire pasture so that the farmer can plant food that he wants, leaving the horse now with nothing but hay. So the horse was put to work to destroy the best part of his life, and he didn't get much reward from it. That's a pretty dumb animal. And yet we all do that. For instance, how many of you hold jobs? If you're holding a job, that means that you're most likely to be in that state of doing what you're told to do. You don't like it very much, and you resent the fact that you don't get the kind of reward out of it that you actually want. So being reborn as a dumb animal is not magical. It happens. It happens to everybody. Okay, being reborn into hell means that you get in situations that you really don't like. You get hot. You get angry. You get frustrated. Well, that's a kind of a state of hell. We also get reborn as a Preta hungry ghost, and the example of that is like a great big pot that's got a very, very small opening in the top. And the hungry ghost is one who wants his great big belly to be filled, but his mouth is very small. All right, so his desire is great, but the ability to fulfill that is very small. And what that is that when each one of us get in a state of wanting something that we do not and cannot have, then we're reborn in the state of that hunger. How many of you have ever been hungry for something? Yeah, when you get really hungry, what that means is that you're being reborn as that hungry ghost. Well, Ananda didn't really kind of understand that very well. And the teaching of Paticca is talking about how we come from our ignorance, we learn things, and so when new things happen, we process the new things as if they were old. We come up with the same old story, and then that's what causes our feelings. And then we like things, and then we want them, and then we get reborn as that hungry ghost. Or we are touched by our own thoughts, and then we don't like what's happening and get reborn in hell. So this is the way that the teaching of Paticca works, and you can understand why the Buddha would tell Ananda, hey man, it's profound and subtle and deep and hard to understand. And actually, the Buddha was just being polite to Ananda. He could have been impolite and says, you doofus, you don't have a clue. All right? So, the reality is that the teachings of the Buddha are simple. They are, in fact, easy to understand, easy to comprehend. And yet, look how many people want to do one Dhamma talk after another Dhamma talk after another Dhamma talk because they come out of the teaching confused. It is profound, but it's very simple. It's very much like, let us say, a child of maybe 8 or 10 years old sits down on a bucket. And the bucket is upright, which means 2/3 of his body or 2/3 of his butt are actually stuck in the bucket. And all he needed to do was to turn the bucket upside down so that he could have a flat surface to sit on. Now, isn't that profound? And that's exactly what we're talking about is that we have to see things upside down from the way that we normally see things. That's in fact something that's in a lot of the suttas where the student will say, "Thank you, Buddha, for setting things upright, that I have been looking at things upside down." And so when we see things upside down and then we learn the teaching of how to set things right, then we say, "Oh, that was profound. That was big." Now, in fact, much of the teachings that we do have is in fact profound because it teaches us something that's completely upside down. An example of is the stuff that we've been talking about, especially in regard to the dumb animal. Because in our society, we've been taught, "Oh, you got to go get a job. Oh, you've got to get skills to get the job. Oh, you've got to learn to count and do arithmetic and learn to read so that you can figure out how to do a job and get a good job." Well, guess what? There's been a whole lot of really, really good, sometimes very high paying jobs, and still you have a whole lot of people who hold those jobs who are miserable, unhappy, want something new, not satisfied. So, how can we teach people then to become satisfied? That's what makes it so profound and difficult to understand, is that we can start getting satisfied without the job. The job is optional. Satisfaction was what we were looking for in the first place. Let's take another example, and that is the example of the hungry ghosts, the preta. We all get in a state of wanting something. I want it, I want it, I want it, I plan for it, I scratch around, I finagle because I want that thing. And guess what? While we're wanting and scratching around and trying to get it, we're not satisfied. And when we get it, we may be satisfied for a little while, maybe a moment or two or a day or so. And then after that, we get back into the habit of wanting and scratching and doing to get something new. In other words, when we think we're going to get satisfied by what we want, and when we get it, we wind up not being satisfied, so we go scratching around to get something new, hoping sometime in there will be satisfaction. That's the normal way that we do it. That's part of the reason why we have jobs, so that we can get what we want. And then we'll become satisfied. And yet satisfaction never is lasting. But the teaching of the Buddha is profound because he teaches, go get your satisfaction directly. Train the mind into being satisfied rather than leaving the mind in a state of desire. So it really is simple, and yet it really is difficult to understand and is profound. It's simple when you look at taking the bucket and turning it upside down. Normally, when we think of a bucket, we think of the bucket as holding water, and so we have the open end on the top, and the base or the bottom is at the bottom. But when you want to use it as a chair, you need to turn it upside down. That's profound for that kid who sat in the bucket when it was upright. And when somebody told him, "Oh, you can turn the bucket around and then it's a chair." So this is the whole point, that it is true, that it is easy, it's to understand, it is easy to practice, and yet for most people, it is difficult, it's profound, it's hard to grasp. And that every one of us does both of those things. Like right now, you're saying, "Oh, it's an easy teaching. We can do it." And then later you'll hear some other Dhamma talk and then get confused and say, "Oh, this is so difficult. Oh, it's so profound. Oh, it's so difficult to understand." And you'll have those thoughts for a day or so, and then you'll put that down and you'll come back and say, "Wait a minute, it really is easy." So we go back and forth and back and forth. And someplace in there is the middle ground. can we, in fact, in our middle ground, hold that the teaching of the Buddha is easy, it's simple, and at the same time, it is difficult and it's profound. It's difficult and profound when we're confused, and it's easy when we can see things clearly. Yes. Oh, go ahead. You have a question. You're mute. Turn your mic on. There you go.
I was working on it. I think your example a bit drifted away from the point when I wanted to ask the question. I could maybe say that it resonates well with me that things could be simple, but at the same time, very profound. I actually wanted to ask, related to the beginning, when you said, the conversation about that what Buddha was teaching is only dukkha and end of dukkha, or perhaps something else as well. One way to approach this is to be like an academic, to just what really Buddha says and like try to translate and look there. I was curious about what do you feel about this question? If you would not even, how do you feel about it? Is there anything that belongs outside of this realm? Suffering and end of suffering. Could it be that actually, and if you would have to, what would that be? Do you understand my question?
I don't think so, because the answer that I would come up with is I feel good. Like I knew I would now. I'm beginning to sing a song, a James Brown song. Okay, that's how I feel about it. I feel really good about the Dhamma. Wow, it is liberating. Wow, what a relief it is. Okay, because it is different than the things that we've been taught our whole lives.
So, okay, so let me try. Maybe you did answer my question, but so it's not what do you feel about Dhamma, but what do you feel about whether there is something more than suffering and the suffering in the Buddha's teaching? Is there some? Could you imagine something else there?
All right. Here's a question back to you then. What? Start naming a few things. What would be better than being satisfied, safe, secure, comfortable, satisfied? You feel like that you've got it all. You're on top of the world. You feel like a lion. You're the boss of your life. Okay. What else?
This is exactly my question to you, so exactly. So I'm
all
not
right, well, give me some examples and I'll say yes or no to any of the examples that you could come up with. Come on, guys, help him out. What else could there be other than Dhamma?
Yeah. So I cannot, I certainly cannot think of anything, but I was wondering if you would approach critically to this.
All right, I'll give you some examples that we can ponder. Okay.
Rebirth in heaven.
All right, how about going to heaven? Heavens and hells. The Buddha teaches that the heavens and hells are right here in front of us. And in fact, everybody goes through their own heavens and hells right in front of you. So why should you bother about a hell that's after you die? That in fact, the Christian version of heaven, the way that they describe it, and I've gone into great detail about that, sometimes on some of the talks, and give you a little example of the paved street with gold. There's a cloud about knee high so that you can't see where you're going. You'll stumble around. That anybody can get into heaven. All they need to do is get forgiveness, which means that heaven is going to be full of pickpockets, thieves, whores, all kinds of folks that got into heaven simply because they got forgiven for doing what they do best. And so when they get to heaven, they're going to get forgiven again, so they're going to continue to do what they do best. So I don't really want to go to the Christian heaven. I got better places to be, like nowhere at all. So much for Christian heaven. I'd rather be actually dead than in Christian heaven. And not only that, but they've got this big dude sitting on a great big high bench looking at everybody. And he's not even happy. I mean, look at the history of God. Wow, what an unhappy character. Tsunamis and floods and roasting people in Sodom and Gomorrah, hanging his own son up. I mean, give me a break. What kind of God do you want to have anyway? All right, so that's one of them. How about heaven? How about hell?
Wait a minute, Dhammarato. I learned that it's not easy to ask, actually, not easy to ask precisely a question sometimes, and of course not the first time. So I didn't think of what generally out of the realm of human mind could be, thinking. I was thinking in actually Buddha's teaching, I was exclusively looking at the Buddha's teaching because, of course, they are complex for a beginner, or even maybe for an expert. Is there anything else in there that belongs outside of the realm of dukkha and the end of dukkha, rather than in any religion or any human endeavor? That was my question.
Well, again, we can have other ideas, for instance, about magical power. Flying through the air with the greatest of ease without even having a rope or a trapeze. In fact, the joke is that I don't want to fly from here to Seattle. My arms get tired of flapping. So we take an airplane, right? We don't want to fly. We don't want magical powers because I'm satisfied with the way that I am. But people who want magical powers, they feel like that they would be better off with magical powers. That in fact they feel like a victim, and that they would feel good and powerful if they had magical powers. So the real magical power is not needing magical powers, because you're already on top of the world. You're finished with your dukkha and you're in a state of nirodha. What else do you want? Here's another example, enlightenment. Well, what is enlightenment? First off, it's a word that is generally not very well defined and diagnosed, and what most people will do with that is put it way, way up high. I mean, like the Christians, they put God in the sky and Jesus up there too, so let's put enlightenment and let's put the Buddha and all of that kind of stuff way out of reach. And if you get a good definition of enlightenment, you find out, oh no, it's not so far away. So if you look at the word light, that means to shine a light, to go into daylight, to see the light of day. This is what it means, and it actually has the connotation of knowledge, to look, to see what's going on. And then the other kind of enlightenment would be light in the sense of not heavy, lightweight, lighten up, drop your load, become free of your burden. So those are the two qualities of enlightenment, and anybody can do that right here, right now. It's not far away. It's available. Now, let us say that somehow or another you had a conversation between two dudes. One was satisfied and the other one was enlightened. And the guy who was satisfied says, oh, you're enlightened? Good for you. I'm satisfied with the way that I am. Why should I want to become enlightened if I'm already satisfied? And the other guy says, oh, well, I'm enlightened. Oh, I'm so much better than you are. And I've seen that recently. And so the guy who is enlightened is probably not very satisfied. He wants something more. He wants to be impressive that he's enlightened, rather than actually being satisfied. So that would be the question, what else would there be other than the Dhamma? The actual answer to that is that when you get a whole lot of nothing, that's enough. And what is the whole lot of nothing? That means that you've already thrown out all the garbage. There's nothing left. And you're completely at ease, at free, and satisfied. not magical, not highfalutin, not way up there, just down to earth and okay with that. That's what the actual teachings of the Buddha really is all about, is to be satisfied. In fact, the word dukkha actually means being dissatisfied. And the word sukha, which is an opposite, means to be satisfied. And the word sukha is right there in the Anapanasati Sutra. Develop being satisfied. Work on it. Ponder it. Check it out. Learn how to be satisfied. Recognizing that what you have, all that you have, is already enough. You don't need another Dhamma talk. You don't need to write a book. You don't need to learn Sanskrit or Pali and then translate the suttas. That you can just sit and be wise and happy. You've heard the expression fat, dumb, and happy? Well, guess what? Most dumb people are not happy. Very few people are dumb and happy. It takes wisdom to be happy. So fat, wise, and happy, that's the way to go. As opposed
Cool. Thanks for the answer. Yeah. Basically, it seems like for you, that's even a kind of a bit silly question to ask, whether there is something else apart from that. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Yes. Well, that actually answers David's question that I asked him before, and that is, what if the Buddha teaches something other than dukkha, dukkha, nirodha? What could it possibly be that the Buddha would teach? What is it? Because he doesn't teach reincarnation. He does teach rebirth, but the rebirth is mental states that we go into one after another. Not that it's a reincarnated kind of thing. He doesn't teach magical power. In fact, the monks who were trying to do magical power, he stopped them from doing that. He wouldn't even let them do things like fortune telling, reading the bones, gambling, all of those kind of things were disallowed. So you couldn't say that fortune telling would be something that the Buddha teaches. He doesn't teach magic. That in fact the word clairvoyance you've heard before, clairvoyance means that you can see what's in front of you. It doesn't mean that you can see something that's happening way out there someplace else or in some other time out into the future. That in fact the problem is that people can't see what's right in front of them because they're not looking. They're too busy thinking about it instead. So that's why I ask you the question, well, what else could there be other than the Dhamma? The answer to that is the only other possibility is ordinary, unwholesome things that are associated with dukkha. And the only thing the Buddha teaches is to drop all of that stuff and get into a state of sukha, to become satisfied without any of the ordinary things that the ordinary people of the ordinary world are out chasing. And sit down and be happy, be satisfied. And when you are sitting there and being satisfied, and all of a sudden some thought comes up that says, oh, I've got to go do this, and oh, I've got to do that. Well, the question is, can you come back into a state of being satisfied? Or perhaps you can be satisfied and get up and go someplace like to lunch and be satisfied while you're doing that, and then come back from lunch and remain satisfied. Or do we sit there satisfied and then thoughts about lunch come up and say, oh, I got to go. And now I'm dissatisfied because I'm not having lunch yet. And let me go do something. And so this is how we normally live our lives, is thinking of something that needs to be done and then go into an unwholesome state, thinking that we've got to do it, rather than, oh, I can do that, I've got a choice. about whether I do it or not, and I have a choice about how I feel about it. And this is really part of what makes this a profound teaching is that we recognize now that we've got new choices. Before we thought that all of our choices was based upon what the world offered us. And now we recognize, no, we've got a new choice, and that is the choice about how we feel. We have a choice about what kind of thoughts we're going to have. We have a choice about our attitude. And when you keep making the right choice about your right attitude, pretty soon your attitude gives you a lot of strength. You feel big and tough and strong and can handle any problem that comes by. And you don't have to wear any labels at all, because the labels are just more burdens to carry around. There are occasions when Westerners will claim that they're enlightened, that in fact that there was a fad for a while. Once Daniel Ingram said that he was an Arahant, now Buddhadasa wants to be one too, and he starts writing, I'm an Arahant, and it just goes on and on and on. But the fact is that Daniel Ingram has gotten a whole lot of flack. He's actually had collected enemies because he made that statement that he's an Arahant. So it's better not to make any statements. It's better just to be satisfied with where you are with no labels at all. Because if you put a label on yourself, you're actually painting a target on yourself. And so it's better to remain targetless. You don't have to, let us say, bother with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that are thrown in the direction of an Arahant, because you don't wear that label. Makes it believe easy, but it's also profound. Because all the people that I know that's heard anything about Buddhism, and the question is asked, do you want to be? Yeah, I want to be. I want to be. I want to be a Sotapan. I want to be an Anagami. I want to be an Arahant. I want to be enlightened. I want to this and I want to that. And that is backwards. Because all of those labels, all those attainments, all those jhanas, for instance, is exactly what the Buddha teaches against. Against desire of things that we want, and just be happy all on our own. Now, Amrit, isn't that profound?
Yes, definitely. I think especially, for instance, I didn't know that you have a choice about your feeling before I start listening to your talks. This part definitely is a profound part.
Mm-hmm.
You choose how you want to feel.
That you can choose to feel the way that you want to feel. And you're wise enough to avoid the dangers that so many people get into through their desiring and wanting things, like wanting to be an Arahant, wanting to be enlightened. And these wind up then being dangerous goals that people have, and it keeps them unhappy and miserable even before they wear the label, and certainly after. So it's better not to wear any labels. About the only label that's worth wearing, and I'm not even sure about it, is the label of human. I will agree that I'm human. But any other labels I don't care to wear. So does anybody have any new questions? Gosh, I think that we just covered everything. Any and everything that's worth having. Go ahead.
I have I will ask a simple question. I have many questions, but I will ask a very simple one related to actually the discussions that we already had. That question regarding the Dhamma talks. So my experience with listening the Dhamma talk and practicing together was kind of pretty profound, and I found it that I absorb, maybe because of the way I feel when I'm also practicing and listening, made it very kind of very good and working well to me. But you mentioned that not a good suggestion for the new meditator or unexperienced meditation. Why did you say that? So it caught my attention that you didn't find this as a good advice to an unexperienced meditator.
Okay, for those who are new and inexperienced, basically the entire, let us say, larger audience, and we'll actually focus in on the Western mind state, but it's actually true more or less worldwide that people are what I will refer to as scatterbrained. They don't listen. They can't listen for very long. They'll hear one word and then they'll think about it and miss two other words, and then they think they know what was said, where in fact they've gotten the wrong idea about it because they made much of it up. That it actually takes someone who is skilled at listening to be able to listen to a Dhamma talk, to actually hear what's being said without trying to filter it through their own understanding and just let it come. And beginners can't do that. They filter everything. They try to put everything that they hear into context about what they already know. That goes back exactly to what that teaching in Sutta number 15 in the Dhamma Nikaya, where the Buddha corrects Ananda. No, you do not understand the Paticca Samuppada. It is profound. It is difficult to understand. And by the way, Ananda, you missed the point. There's, by the way, a later part of that story that's in this number 16 in the Dhamma Nikaya that actually comes out of the Udana. And that is that after the Buddha died, Ananda was not going to be allowed into the meeting that they were going to have. And I think it was Mahamagala. No, Mahamagala has died. It was Mahakachana that was setting up the meeting so that they could discuss and get set down correctly and memorize what the Buddha had taught, and they weren't going to let Ananda in the show. Why not? Because they too understand that he did not understand the actual teachings of the Buddha. He followed the Buddha around for 25 years. He waited on him. But you can imagine that often table waiters do not understand the conversation that's being held at the table. The people who are eating know what's going on, but the table waiters, they don't know, but they think they do. And this was the state that Ananda was in. And so just before the meeting happened, he was laying down and he woke up and said, wait a minute, everything that I had learned was wrong, and the Buddha was teaching something completely different. And when he realized that and woke up to the fact that reality is reality and what I've been thinking is not, then they let him into the meeting. So that finishes that part of it, that it is profound. It's profound because we want it to be according to what we already believed instead of seeing it as it actually is. And what the teaching actually is come out of your dukkha, leave it. Let it be empty. Dukkha Nirodha, that's the actual real teaching of the Buddha. And guess what? It's marvelous. It's magnificent. It's profound. It's subtle. And it's easy when you remember it. It's easy when you remember it, and subtle and profound and difficult when we forget. And this is why the Buddha taught sati. Sati means to wake up and to be in the present moment and see things the way that they really are, so you can take a really good close look at the way things really are. And then the third item on the Eightfold Noble Path is now you can make a change. Right noble effort. But we can't make a right noble effort if we can't have a right noble view, and we can't have a right noble view if we don't have right noble sati to wake up and take a look at really what's going on so that we can make a change. And in this regard, sati comes first. But in another regard, ditti, looking, that's the main goal. That's what really comes first, is to be able to look, to be able to see what is dukkha and what is not dukkha. But in fact, almost all the beginning students struggle with their meditation because they can't tell the difference between ordinary life and what is suffering versus what it is like to drop that stuff and be free from suffering. We have to actually learn to drop dukkha in order to learn to drop it. Almost like a catch-22. This is why we have to keep practicing over and over and over again to drop our burden, to drop our suffering, to drop our desires, our wants, and to let things be the way that they are happily. That's what the real teaching of the Buddha is. That's why it's so profound, so difficult for most people to understand, is because they want to put it through their own filter. And that's the reason that they have suffering in the first place, is because they want to filter everything, put it through the filters. And most of the filters we learned in childhood, and we were really ignorant when we were children, and so we picked up a lot of useless, unnecessary filters. One of the major filters that we put up with is you got to work if you got to eat. Or they say it backwards, actually. You got to eat, so you got to work. Well, there are millions and millions and millions of people on the planet Earth who find ways of not working and eating. David, you don't do much work and you're eating pretty good. Same thing with you, Daniel.
That's right.
And yet most people are caught up into that filter of, oh, I've got to have a job. I've got to have a job to eat. I've got to have a job to get what I want. I've got to go to have a job, though, I got to go get a car. To have a job, I got to go buy clothes. To have a job, I've got to go someplace and do something that I don't really want to do all the time. And so the reality is that you really don't need a job in order to be happy. That in fact, most people who have jobs are not happy. So when you begin to see that jobs are optional, now you've got a choice. Now you've got a choice because you can see things as optional. Amrit, go ahead.
Yeah, I think another distinction I just thought of between understanding, say, teaching of Buddha and understanding some other theoretical concept. For instance, say, understanding Newton's law or Einstein's theory, is that once you understand, say Einstein theory is like you spend some time, you understand it, and then it's in the background of your mind.
Okay, all right.
Understanding Buddha's teaching is like you have to keep applying it. So it has to be like in a foreground. I think this is what you meant by sati. So bringing it in a foreground and keep applying it.
And keep applying it, exactly right. All right. Here's the point, is that before Newton, it was possible for people to be happy. That because Newton invented calculus, because he calculated the formula for gravity, didn't make the world any happier at all. It made it more technological, but it didn't make any of the technological people happy. The same thing with Einstein. He came along. I think, in fact, I could go so far as to say I know enough about the two of them to recognize that Newton was pretty miserable and Einstein was a pretty happy old man. Okay, but it wasn't Newtonian physics that made Einstein happy, nor was it Einsteinian physics that made him happy. He talks about his blunders, about the cosmological constant and other things like this. But we need the physics that Einstein came up with in order to have things like the cell phones and GPS and Wi-Fi and all of that kind of stuff is actually based upon Einsteinian physics. Now, the smartphone came out in about 2004 to 2006 timeframe. There were happy people before the cell phone. And now the question is that after you guys all have a cell phone, or does it make you happy? Does the cell phone make you happy? I see a lot of smiles, so I guess that means yes, my cell phone makes me happy, but I don't think so. Cell phones do not bring happiness. Cell phones, at the best, they structure time. They teach us how to happily waste time by not giving a flying rip. And when you turn the cell phone off, all of your old worries come right back again. So it does have an advantage, but it's ignorant advantage. The question is, can you wisely use the cell phone so that you can remain happy with or without it? Because it really doesn't cause that much happiness. I mean, look at, for instance, the way that the cell phones and social media. Look at social media. How many happy people do you find on social media? Except for perhaps our Skype groups. But Reddit, oh, they're at each other's throat. Twitter, wow, what a mess. People are not happy on social media at all. And so the cell phones don't create happiness. They may diverge you, create a diversion for a while, but ultimately technology doesn't do it. The teachings of the Buddha have been around for 2,500 years, and all along there have been those who did understand the teachings of the Buddha. They got over the fact that they were profound, they put it to practice, and they became happy dudes with one label after another, but they were happy. Nowadays, the same thing is available to us. In fact, that's what the word noble means. When we talk about the noble eightfold path, the noble truths are noble because they're long-lasting. How many of you have heard of noble elements, noble gases? Why do we call them noble? It's because they don't interact. There is no such thing as argon oxide, because argon is not affected by oxygen. It's noble. It's a noble gas. Radon, there's quite a number of them. And then in fact we can call gold a noble element because you can have a ship that's been in the bottom of the sea for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the gold is still good. It didn't get eaten away by the salt. The fish didn't eat it. Gold stays gold. It's kind of noble. So this is what we mean by the Four Noble Truths, is that they're noble. They were noble from the time of the Buddha. In fact, the Buddha says that these truths existed before he found them. He just discovered them, but they were old. Long before the Buddha discovered the Four Noble Truths, they existed, and they still exist today. And that is, dukkha exists. Dissatisfaction exists. The cause of dissatisfaction is primarily stupidity and ignorance. And when we come out of our stupidity and see things the way that they really are, we can make a change from seeing it stupidly into seeing wisely. And so the Four Noble Truths remain noble. They remain in effect. And that's why they're noble. Come cell phones or not, come gyroscopes or not, come airplanes or not, come sex or not, whatever you can have as compared, you got it, you don't have it, the Four Noble Truths still are in existence. They don't get watered down or messed up with other stuff. It's separate. That's why it's called noble. And that's also, Amrit, part of the reason why it's considered profound. Difficult to understand is because it don't mess with all the other stuff that humans have been messing with all these years. That's what makes it noble, is that it stands apart. It's singular. Dukkha, dukkha nirodha. That's all the Buddha needs to teach, because that's the only thing that we really need. Anything else that you would add to it is just more ordinary stuff. So, Rick, what are you looking at?
I'm just looking at the view.
The view. That's that women's show in the morning that they have.
No, the view of Bangkok.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, Bangkok is pretty ordinary. It's an impressive ordinary, but it's ordinary. And what we're talking about here is profound. It's profound and deep and difficult to understand, simply because, for instance, Bangkok gets in the way of us hearing things correctly. So, David, what do you think?
Not much. It's a good talk. It's funny.
All right. How about you, Philip? You seem to have been enjoying yourself.
Yes. Yeah, you asked me if I had a question before, and actually I was thinking about a lot about this Dharma talk thing that we were talking today. So I didn't know that was a question I wanted to ask. So I got a lot out of this talk.
Great.
Yeah.
How about you, Daniel?
Oh, it was interesting that you said that about the extremes, that we either watch too much Dhamma talks and don't look at anything else, or we don't do it at all and we get bored. But when you were at Watsu and Mok, you had nothing to do all day, and you also didn't get bored. Well, sometimes you probably did. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, I just find it really difficult to see when it's actually good to do it and when not, because it does help me, but at the same time it's a crutch to escape boring moments.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
I would say offhand that having Dhamma books or having Dhamma talks on the cell phone is better than sitting and being bored. Because why? Because boredom is actually the state of wanting right now to be different than it is. That in fact, the English word of boredom has the quality in the sutras of called restlessness. That we want something. And if we can recognize that we want something, then we can do something about it. And one of the things that you could do about restlessness and boredom is to listen to a Dhamma talk, to take your mind off of the restlessness and boredom. And that your question, actually, the answer to it is yes, there was a time, and the routine is that I would do a 10-day meditation retreat in teaching, followed by 20 days of silence out in the back of the woods. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and Achan Po mainly didn't have me doing anything else other than teaching and then nothing. And that was my schedule. 10 days of talking, 10 days of complete silence, not seeing anybody except occasionally Achan Po. And one of the things that I do remember about that was that I would get hoarse in the Dhamma teaching because I had been in silence for 20 days. And every time a retreat would start up, I would start getting hoarse, laryngitis.
Sorry, what is that?
Pardon?
I didn't understand the word you were saying. Norse, horse?
Hoarse. I can't talk. Oh, I've been talking so long. I'm so sick of talking. Oh,
Like physically or like also mentally?
actually, it can have both qualities to it
Right.
for most ordinary people. But for people who are teaching the Dhamma, talking the Dhamma is really a very joyful kind of thing. So it's actually, in that regard, more physical. That the throat hurts, but the mind's sharp.
Yeah.
But during that time, I do remember one time getting, especially about the end of the 20-day period, that I had gotten bored. And then all kinds of thoughts about, oh, I could make $100 an hour if I went back to the West and took up computers. Or, oh, if I just go traveling, everything would be better. And so everything would come like that. And then it occurred to me that really was what was going on is that I'm bored because I'm not practicing correctly. And then I took a deep breath and says, never mind. I'm not bored because I'm satisfied with the way things are. But that happens with everybody. When they begin to get satisfied, boredom will come up. Can you see that boredom so that you have a choice about it? And what would you choose? To be bored or satisfied when you've got nothing to do? Yes, boredom did come. In fact, it had to do with a particular magazine.
Motorcycle.
Motorcycle magazine. And I read that magazine front to cover. I knew every picture. I knew every article. And I was bored with having only one book. And it was a motorcycle magazine. I didn't even have any Dhamma books. Back in the 1980s, there were almost no written Dhamma books available. I mean, even the famous Majjhima Nikaya that was done by Bhikkhu Bodhi didn't even come out till 1995. There was very little literature and almost nothing at Wat Suan Mok. There was a lot of Thai books, but I didn't read Thai. So all I had was a motorcycle magazine. And boy, did I become bored with that one magazine. And then I recognized, oh, it's because I'm not practicing correctly. I could sit here and just be happy. Why am I looking for something? Okay, so you can practice that too. When you get bored, you can say, hot dog, I see that boredom. I recognize I've got a choice here. And I can sit here and be happy, or I can sit here and be bored.
Yeah, so I basically should only use the Dhamma talks when I have like questions and not to structure my time.
Well, questions are actually confusion.
Right.
And so confusion and doubt is like worry and restlessness. So what would you choose? Would you choose to have questions, or can you just sit there happy without having the answers to your question? I mean, you don't need the answers to those questions in order to be happy.
Yeah, so I shouldn't watch Dhamma talks.
Well, I'm saying to be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, and to give the opposite of that is that, especially for beginners who don't really know the Dhamma and don't have it on their mind, watching Dhamma books, watching Dhamma talks, listening to them over and over again begins to get that repetitive part of the Dhamma coming back to mind over and over and over and over and over again. And so for beginners, watching a lot of videos is quite useful. But that's not the only thing. That's only to get them started so that they can say, okay, let me finish with the Dhamma talks right now, and I'll just sit here and be happy like I've been learning on the Dhamma talks. But you can listen to the Dhamma talks, say, just sit there and be happy. And you continue to listen, you continue to read, you continue to want more and more and more, and all you're going to learn is can you sit down and just be happy?
Yeah.
And we don't practice that. We would rather listen to more Dhamma talks.
Actually, kind of the reason I'm asking you is because a few months ago I had a similar question, but that was regarding the suttas. And basically back then you told me something like, oh, you can read like 10 suttas in like 3 months or something. So I was thinking maybe you have like a specific recommendation. And I think with the suttas, it's maybe a different story because those are, yeah, really good to read because they are like the Buddha's own words, I guess. So those are just really useful to know. So it's a bit different than a Dhamma talk then, I guess.
Right? That all Dhamma talks have an opinion or an expression, and sometimes that's really valuable. That in fact the Buddha talks about it in Sutta number 139 in the Majjhima Nikaya, that the Dhamma should be taught in the native language of the student who's listening, not in the language of the teacher. And often when you're reading suttas, you're not actually reading what the Buddha taught, you're reading some translator's idea about what the Buddha taught. And you can find a lot of mistakes in the translations. Or you listen to some teacher like Ajahn Sumedho or Ajahn Thanissaro or Santikaro, and what you're hearing then is their impression, their interpretation of the teaching of the Buddha. And they add examples that may be really great. That I've got a whole bag full of stories and ways to get the Dhamma across, but not every student is going to use the examples that I use in order to help them understand. And in fact, some of the stories will confuse some students. And the question is, when you get confused, can you see, oh, that's just confusion. Never mind. I can sit here and be happy. I don't have to have my questions answered. I already know enough of the Dhamma to recognize that questions and doubts and all of that is just a hindrance to being happy. Wisdom means that I can be dumb and happy. I don't know the answer to the question, but I don't need to know the answer to the question because I already know enough Dhamma. How much Dhamma do I know? Never mind, start again. Never mind, everything's okay. Everything is fine, not a worry in the world. And that's all the real, the Dhamma that we need, enough to practice, to put ourselves in a state of comfortable happiness. Safe, secure, comfortable, satisfied, and successful. And with that becomes wealth, and you become wealthy with the Dhamma. No more doubts, no more worries, no more discussions. We've got it. But this is a feeling, not a point of information. That in fact, wanting more data and wanting answered questions is kind of like the scientific mind. We're looking for facts. And in fact, the real teaching of the Buddha is not about facts. It's about a feeling. And what is that feeling? The feeling of comfort, the feeling of security, the feeling of satisfaction, the feeling of success. These are feelings that you can actually learn to control, but most people don't have those feelings. Most people have the feelings of fear, anxiety, frustration, feelings of wanting something and being dissatisfied. And we spend much of our time in those kind of feelings. And you can change them. You have the ability to recognize how you feel and then make a change so that you feel the way that you want to feel. So I found it amusing when I was asked, how do you feel about something? Well, I feel the way that I want to feel about it. My choice. Often we ask, how do you feel about something, when in fact we're looking for information? Well, the information is irrelevant. I feel good because that's my choice. So does anybody have any further questions? Everybody satisfied? Marcus, you okay over there?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. How about you, Patrick? You okay? Well, guys, thank you very much. This has been a delightful conversation. I hope you've had as much fun and enjoyment as I've had.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
guys. We'll
Bye.
see you later.
See you later.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Actually, Dhammarato, if you're still in the talk,
Pardon?
if you are still in, it seems like you didn't hang up. A question for you, specifically for you. If I would like to come visit you, what would be the way and what would be the time?
Okay, the way to find out is go on to Skype and find the Skype group, the Sangha Travel Thailand. Okay, and that gives directions right here to the house. That's better than me taking the time to do that. It's actually got a map that's got directions right on it from Ban Thai. I live in Ban Thai.
Bam Thai. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm getting that correctly, but I will try. Bam Thai. Can you say it one more time?
Ban Thai. It's about 10. It's about 10 kilometers from Tong Sala on the way to Had Ren.
Okay, I will look it up. And what
No,
about?
look up the Skype group. The Skype group called the Sangha Travel Thai.
Sangha Travel Thai. Okay.
It's an open group. It should be available to you by searching.
Okay.
If you can't find it, go on to the Sangha UK group that you're on now, and somebody will give you the URL or set you as a member.
What's a good time, if it makes sense to ask this question?
Well, daytime is the best time.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's all.
All right. We'll see you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.